No, I was waiting to see if anyone else was going to show. But of our semi-regulars.
Tony and Jeanette won't be here.
Okay. That's good to know.
Okay. She called the office, I know that.
It didn't get to me.
But they should be fired.
Oh, British. Yeah, don't want.
Statistic just released yesterday, actually a survey of all of Europe, so it's not only the British, but the British had a particularly high number. 25% of British people don't want a in the family. Fill in the blank.
Jew.
Yeah, Jew.
I was going to say black.
The only thing that scored higher was Muslim. Yes.
I could understand that.
Yes, really. And in fact, the only country in Europe that scored higher on this particular question than England was Italy, which was at 27%. Netherlands, you might be interested to know, was at the bottom with only 4% of people answering the question in that way. So a little bit of an enlightenment of exactly the degree to which people may not be virulently anti-Semitic in the open. There are not exactly pogroms that are happening in England or Italy, for that matter. And certainly Jews can reach the highest level of political office and business leadership. They are well represented at universities. But when it comes to family, that's where people draw the line. At least 1 in 4 in England draw the line to say, okay, fine. You know, they can live in our country. They can shop in our shops. They can, you know, use our bathrooms.
We'll take their money.
We'll take their money. But in the family, no. I would not be happy to have one of them in my family.
So that was
yesterday.
Yes, but that was were there, what was the percentage of other things filled in?
You mean the survey response that I read only talked about Muslims and Jews, and Muslims averaged across Europe 10 points higher than Jews, as being more rejected than Jews by on average 10%.
Because of fear that they're going to be blown up.
Well, one could try to come up with a rational explanation, but if you were coming up with a rational position, you would say, you know, 100% of British people don't want a violent criminal in their family.
Yeah.
And I think that all of us would agree on that as well. And so, yes, I wouldn't want a terrorist in my family. I don't care whether he's a white supremacist terrorist or whether he's a Muslim terrorist. I wouldn't want a terrorist. But when you start categorizing by race or by religion in this particular case, then you're no longer making a rational statement about why you don't want this person in your family. You're making a racial statement or a discriminatory statement about something with that group, as though all members of the group share the same characteristic. We would never want to do that, right?
Well, the Brits are very prejudiced. We've always known that.
But I'm talking about us.
Was this prejudice or was this for religious reasons?
Explain the difference. So you're saying they wouldn't want a Jewish person in the family because they don't worship Jesus.
Something along that line.
Right. So possibly. And indeed, are there reasons why we might not want someone from a different outgroup to be part of the family? Well, let's look at our own internal gossip. Beha'alotechah, page 833. We are on chapter 12 of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. 833. If this story of who do you want in the family isn't ringing a bell, then it reinforces my feelings that a lot of people during the summer months skip Torah portions. You know, just because I go on vacation usually around this time, and so I haven't been able to teach Beha'alotechah. I think I've only taught it in the 8 years I've been here like 3 times. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be still reading. And there's a very, very famous story with a lot of good family drama. And those are usually the kind of stories people love because they're the ones that make us most uncomfortable. But we're going to deconstruct it, find out what's actually going on, but then we are going to circle back around and deal with the question that we might have thought we were dealing with at the beginning. With that as a good, totally confusing introduction, I need a volunteer to read.
All right.
You're welcome. All right.
Volunteer.
So we're on chapter 12.
Yeah, chapter 12. When they were at Hazareth, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman he had married. He married a Cushite woman, they said.
All right, hold on. He married a Cushite woman. Pause. That's the one joy of being the reader, is you have to get used to me interrupting you. What's a Cushite?
Right.
So it's a black person.
Okay, so oh, was that what they put there? That Nubian or Ethiopian, right? So Cush is the Hebrew word that is usually identified with the geography in Africa that we would call Ethiopia. So that was the term that was used for that part of the African continent during ancient biblical times. So if you said somebody was from Cush, it meant somebody was from Ethiopia. Hodu was India, Cush was Ethiopia, which if that pair sounds familiar, that is because the beginning of the book of Esther tells us about the Persian kings, that they ruled from Hodu to Cush. They ruled from India to Ethiopia. That's trying to set up your expectations. So Cush is usually recognized as being Ethiopia as a geography, but Cushi as an adjective could mean either Ethiopian, as in his wife happened to have an Ethiopian passport, or it could be making a statement about her racial category of what color is her skin, that she is Cushi in the sense of being Ethiopian of racial genetic characteristics, not only political, geographical affiliation. And indeed, in modern Hebrew, the term Cushi is often used in a very pejorative sense by people that are discriminating against those with blacker skin. So that makes it even more complicated. But for this case, we're using the term only in the biblical sense and not trying to use it in any of the modern senses that is become slang in certain unfortunate circles in modern Hebrew. So what's the problem? What are they saying about her?
She's not one of us.
She's different.
Okay, well, did they say she's different? She's not one of us?
She's not one.
All right, so that's kind of the problem, is they say that she's from Cush, but they don't actually say why that's an issue. So one option could be she's not one of us. Another option could be, she's not part of the covenant, perhaps. Another option could be we don't like her skin color.
Wait a minute. This commentary says that it's Porah.
Oh, well, okay, so back up. Who is this Cushite wife? Because where was Zipporah, the wife that we all know by name, that Moses met when he left Egypt? Where was she from?
Midian.
Midian. Very famously, she was from Midian. Jethro, her father, was from Midian.
Yeah.
He was.
So has he taken a second one?
So maybe it's not a question of that she is Cush. Maybe it's a question of that this is wife number 2, right? Maybe it's not that she's Cushite and that's why we're upset. Maybe it's he has a Midianite wife and now he has a Cushite wife too. Maybe it's the fact that there's another wife that's happening that is bringing their commentary, their opposition, right? So just a little bit of sensitivity that we might leap to certain definitions or certain identification of the problem because of our own wrestling in the modern world with questions of race or of us versus them. But this could have been simply an objection of why does he need another wife? Right? He's already got Zipporah. He's already got this Midianite woman. Why have a Cushite woman? Again, not that Cush is the problem, but it's the woman number 2 that might be the issue. Well, unfortunately, the Torah doesn't give us more direct explanation, but it could be giving us indirect explanation of what issue it is they object to. So we're going to keep going now with verse 2. They said.
Okay. They said, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well?
Wait a minute. What? That's the perfectly natural conclusion to an argument about who your brother married, right? So, well, yeah, what does that mean?
There's something about status going on here.
It sounds like they're jealous.
Yeah,
Okay, so
or he's cutting them out in the sense of, we also speak to God,
jealous and status or hierarchy, those are perfectly good things that people can be arguing about. Indeed, we're going to see in Korach that people are going to argue about Moses putting on heirs and taking over too much, and Aaron having too much power, and all of those types of arguments about hierarchy and status. We're going to have those same issues with Joshua arguing against the guys who are prophesying in the camp and all of those. But these seem like two very separate issues.
He's the baby of the family too. And I know how older siblings can act.
Yes, older siblings can sometimes be, but well, who's Moses think he is? So are these two separate issues? Or is there some way to link the issue of who he's married to and his status in comparison to their own status? Right? Are they arguing about Moses on two different fronts? Or is this really one complaint that is blended together? And we don't understand it because we live in a very different culture and we're missing some of the assumptions that they would have had.
Okay, so Aaron is married. We know that.
Mhm.
And he has kids. Is Miriam ever married?
She's not mentioned, her husband isn't mentioned by name, but it is assumed through...
And no kids by name.
By name, no. But it is assumed that she is also married. The Midrash identifies a husband for her and gives her, a full family history, if you will. But in the Torah itself, there's no mention specifically of her husband as being an important character.
I'm just trying to figure out, because Miriam gets into all this trouble because she's making snide remarks.
Well, and that's the question. Is this even necessarily snide? Right? There might be some legitimate reason that they're complaining about this point, which we might be missing again because we lack the cultural context that they would have been in. Let's go on and see how this gets resolved, and that might tell us a bit more about what the issue was. Because remember, usually in Torah, the punishment fits the crime when it's God that's actually carrying out the punishment.
Now Moses was a very humble man, more so than any other man on earth. Suddenly the Lord called to Moses, Aaron and Miriam, come out, you three, to the tent of meeting. All
right, so what just happened here? One, we were told why Moses didn't defend himself, because he is too humble to defend himself. If other people are going to say negative things about himself, he doesn't want to stand up and say, no, no, no. But what would he be bragging about? Well, what immediately does God do when he wants to bring an end to this? He calls them to the tent of meeting, right? And that is something that normally happens for Moses, occasionally happens for Aaron. We've never seen Miriam called there specifically, although we definitely know that Miriam is considered, and Neviah is considered a prophetess. But she doesn't normally have that same thing. So we continue now in the middle of verse 4. Or sorry, we continue now with verse 5.
So the three of them went out.
Okay, yes, that's what. Yes, keep going then.
The Lord came down in a pillar of cloud, stopped at the entrance of the tent, and called out Aaron and Miriam. The two of them came forward, and he said, hear these my words. When a prophet of the Lord arises among you, I make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is trusted through my household. With him I speak mouth to mouth, plainly, and not in riddles, and he beholds the likeness of the Lord. How then did you not shrink from speaking against my servant Moses? Still incensed with them, the Lord departed. Okay,
so the whole wife thing seems to have fallen away as a major issue, right? It's really focusing on the status issue where they said, God talks to us too, and God shows up and says, oh, no, I don't. Not the way I talk to him. right? The way I talk to him is different than the way I talk to you. And yes, you're wonderful and great, but he's greater. And my relationship with him is different than my relationship with you. So therefore, you shouldn't be surprised that there is a difference in status, and you shouldn't be jealous, because you, of all people who know me better than most people, should recognize that it is inappropriate to be casting any sort of doubt or aspersions on Moses, because he simply is in a different category, a category all by himself.
Isn't there a commandment you don't speak ill against your leaders?
In general, absolutely. You don't speak ill of anyone in general, but yes, against leaders even more so.
And here also, it appears as if Miriam and Aaron are seized by an attribute of judgment.
Yes.
So their attribute of judgment invokes the attribute of justice from God.
You mean their judgmentalism
Their
against
judgmental
Moses?
seems to,
But yet we're still
which is a warning to all of us.
right, which we're going to see in the commentary. This is very much what is unpacked by the sages, but we're still left. So why do we bother mentioning Cush? Right? Does this have any connection to anything, or was it just a casual term that was being used? We will come back to that in the commentary, but just to make sure that we're not completely out of color context, keep reading and notice if we get a mention of any other color in the process.
As the cloud withdrew from the tent, there was Miriam stricken with snow-white scales.
Right, that's tzara'at, the condition we've talked about before that usually gets translated as leprosy, but isn't actually leprosy. I have to say that disclaimer every time. It's in my contract. And notice the coloring.
It's white.
It's white.
Snow White.
Snow white. Right? That's the term that's used is from sheleg, from the word for snow. Right? She has this affliction, that's tzara'at, like snow. So her body has been turned snow white with this rather unattractive scaling of the skin, which is a huge problem and was generally considered to be an upsetting or embarrassing condition for a person to have. Right?
Eczema.
Well, it wasn't a medical physical condition. This is a spiritual manifestation, and one that you would not want to be displaying to other people. Right? So is there a play on words happening here between her usage of the term Cushi for her sister-in-law, and now her being turned this sort of hideous whiteness?
Complete opposite.
Yeah, there's such a thing as being black and beautiful and white and ugly, which could be what's happening here. But there's still no indication that it was the blackness, if that is what was meant, and we're going to find a couple other options in the commentary. There's no indication that it was the blackness that was an issue, just because we also still don't know whether or not his wife is actually black. So but definitely the text seems to be providing us with a possible parallel mirror sort of reflection going on here. Now, in the interest of time, we're going to have to leave the cure that she does get. Moses prays on her behalf. She has a extended time out, but then she is cured. And we will continue with our texts. There we go. Let's see if I can do a better job sliding them to you. All right, so first we're going to just see exactly how this fits within all of the pieces into a single narrative. So rather than having one argument about status or jealousy, one argument about his wife, maybe also with a racial component, we're going to see how all of this ties neatly up together according to the rabbinic reading. So we are on the first page where it says Miriam and Aaron spoke.
She spoke first.
All right, now why did I put the FS there? That's grammatical notation for feminine singular, which is drawing our attention to the fact that back on page 833, it says Vatidaber, right? It doesn't say Vatidabru. It doesn't say, or Yidabru, then they spoke. It says, and she spoke in the Hebrew grammar, even though it's mentioning Aaron and Miriam. Now, normally when you get two nouns together, especially when it's mixed male and female, you get the verb according to the mixed group, which would in this case be a masculine plural. But instead, here the verb is following the feminine singular. Why, says the commentary? because she's the one who spoke first, and you'll notice that she is the one listed first as being the one talking. So it's sort of as though she opens the conversation with her brother Aaron about this topic. Now, what therefore is the topic? Keep going.
Therefore, Scripture mentions her first. How did she know that Moses had separated from his wife? Natan says, Miriam was beside Zipporah when Moses was told that Eldad and Medad were prophesying in the camp. When Zipporah heard this, she said, woe to the wives, if they are required to prophesy, for they will separate from their wives, just my husband separated from me.
Go ahead and read the last little bit there from this.
From this, Miriam knew and told Aaron.
All right, so what's happening here is an extended family drama of what is it like to be the first lady of the Jewish nation. What is it like to be Zipporah? And Zipporah, according to this reading and other parts of Midrash, was separated intimately, which meant there had to be a divorce, according to some definitions, from her husband Moses. Why? Because Moses could be required to come and attend to God at a moment's notice. And if he was regularly involved in intimacy with his wife, there would be times when he would be unable to have that spontaneous meeting. And therefore, he had to abstain. And since you don't abstain from intimacy with your partner forever and remain their partner, they had separated. They had gone their ways. So now that there are two other guys who are prophesying, Zipporah goes, too bad for them, because that means their wives are going to have to separate from them too. And Miriam goes, what are you talking about? You don't have to separate just because you're a prophet. I'm married, and I'm not separate. Aaron's married. He's not separate. We're both prophets. What do you mean you have to separate from your husband? You mean Moses all the way 2 years ago when we were at Mount Sinai? From that point on, Moses hasn't been with you? She is indignant in defense of Zipporah's right as a wife. And she can't understand why Moses would have separated, because who does he think he is? We're prophets too. God talks to us and we didn't have to separate. Why should he? Which then, as you'll see when we unpack the rest of the narrative, explains why God confronts them the way God does. Go ahead and finish up this section from Tanchuma, however. The now if.
Now if Miriam, who did not intend to disparage him, was punished, all the more so someone who disparages his fellow.
Right, so just a little moral lesson, which is Miriam was sort of saying this like, whoa, I don't understand, poor Zipporah, which ended up being a bit of an insult towards Moses, but that wasn't her intention. And they're saying if she got punished for saying something that was insulting, even when she didn't mean it to be an insult, all the more so somebody who wants to be insulting is in trouble. So that's just a little moral lesson. But going on and reinforcing what I already said about the hasn't he spoken to us line.
Hasn't he spoken to us too? Yet we haven't abstained from intimacy.
And I'm sorry for leaving out the E in the word haven't. And then carrying on, they point out how the trial that God gives them shows his point.
He revealed himself to them suddenly, when they were ritually unclean following intimacy, and they cried, water, water. He thus showed them that Moses had done right in separating from his wife, since the divine presence revealed itself to him frequently, and there was no set time for divine communication.
Right, so as I said, Moses had to be on call 24/7. They didn't. And when God wants to show that that makes Moses different, and therefore his action, and only his action, by the way, make sure that you're getting this point, that Judaism is saying that only Moses had to be celibate. Every other prophet was expected to be intimate with their partner, male and female. But because of that, that meant that when God said, I want to talk to you all right now, he was basically duplicating for them what he does with Moses on a regular basis, and they had to delay in order to go to the mikveh before they could actually go and appear before God. And that was sort of driving home the point of, you see, you don't have to do this all the time. Moses does. You guys, you get to take your time, be intimate, go to the mikveh, whatever else you need to do before you appear before me. Moses doesn't have that luxury. So yeah, he's right for doing what he's doing. Make sense? Okay. But we're still left with Cush. We're still left with Ethiopia. And so now we're going to see how does our tradition, or at least different voices in our tradition, understand this phrase of being a Cushite woman.
The Cushite woman. Scripture teaches that everyone acknowledged her beauty, just as everyone acknowledges a Cushite's blackness.
Right? So by saying that she was a Cushite was to say she is obviously beautiful, right? Because it's just something that is completely undeniable. And then going on to make that connection even further, the Tanhuma continues to give us a little gematria.
Cushite's numerical value is equal to
Yefat Mar'eh, which means it's there. The next.
Oh, beautiful in appearance.
Exactly. Right. So what he's basically saying is, if you take the word Kushi and you take the word Yefat Mar'eh and you do the math of what the numbers of the letters add up to, it's the same number. Right. So being from Kush means you are beautiful in appearance. So this term was used as another way of saying that she was beautiful. Now, the question would then become, so why not just say she's beautiful, right? We're going to come back to that in two texts, actually. We have another intermediate text first to give us of why bother telling us anything else about her, this Cushiteness. It seems like a redundant adjective.
For he had married a Cushite woman. What does this redundant phrase mean to say? You find a woman who is beautiful in appearance, but unpleasant in deed, or a woman who is unpleasant in deed, but not beautiful in appearance. This one, however, was pleasant in every respect.
Right. So why did it say they complained about the Cushite woman? Because he had married a Cushite woman. Why use both of those phrases? Why not just say he'd married a Cushite woman once and be done with it? Because sometimes you marry a woman and she's a beautiful woman, and sometimes not such a nice person. And sometimes you marry somebody who's a nice person, but not exactly the best looker. This woman had both, right? She was Cushite in appearance and she was Cushite in behavior. She was beautiful in appearance and she was beautiful in behavior. And so him being married to her was mentioned twice to drive that point home. But again, why do I need this adjective at all? Right? I mean, are we really trying to identify a particular country, or are we trying to do something else here? And this is where we get the last of the Tanhuma's commentary. She was called
the Cushite on account of her beauty, as a man would call his handsome son Cushite to negate the power of the evil eye.
Right. So Cushite is code for attractive, because you don't want to actually say attractive. Because if you go around saying, this is my attractive son, then he's going to get hit in the face with a stick, right? You're going to get his nose broken the next day. You know it, right? I mean, we've all been there. You say, wow, don't you like my new car? Isn't it beautiful? The next day, bam, someone rear ends you. So if you actually say he married a beautiful woman, then that's potentially a problem. But if you use a code for beautiful, like Cushite is, because it's equal to Yefat Mar'eh, the beautiful in appearance, then you can sort of slip it under the radar as a sly compliment that isn't going to invoke jealousy among other people. Make sense? But of course, that definition would then mean that this is regular Tzipporah from Midian, and she's not actually Cushite. Right? She's not from Ethiopia. She's probably just of Middle Eastern genetic descent. And the Cushite term is just this sly way of complimenting her without invoking too much jealousy. That is not universally accepted. There are commentaries who think, no, this is actually someone from Cush, from Ethiopia, which is what we're going to get in the next line. Oh, question.
You're probably already going to go here, but I'll just ask the question anyway. How was he married at all? If he had to separate from Miriam for the reason that he's the number one prophet.
Right. Well, so that's why using that first line of commentary, what we've been following through Tanhuma, because I found that Tanhuma gave a good sequence of description of all of the points in rabbinic literature on that line. This is not a second woman. This is Zipporah at all. I mean, full stop from the beginning all the way through the end. And this is the unpacking of Zipporah's turmoil of what is it like to be married to Moses. It's not a bed of roses. However, there are other commentaries that say, nope, this is not about separating from his wife because he became a prophet and all of that. This is about him marrying a different woman. And when he married this other woman, she was actually Cushite. She was from Ethiopia and therefore of African descent, and we would assume from African genetics. So that's what we're going to get in Rashbam.
She was from the family of Ham, as it is written in the Chronicles of Moses, that Moses ruled 40 years in the land of Cush, and took the queen of Cush for a wife.
All right, so Chronicles of Moses is a very famous apocryphal book, which means it's not part of the Bible, but it is another Biblica era writing that gives additional information about Moses. And in that book, it argues that Moses lived in Cush, in Ethiopia, among the people of Ham, among the descendants of Ham, the son of Noah, and that he married a Cushite queen, that he had married a queen from Cush, which would have been somebody who was African of genetics, so she would have been black.
This was before the Exodus even?
This is before the Exodus, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, you know,
That's when he ran away.
he wasn't just being a shepherd the whole time. You know, because there's 40 years between when he runs away and when he comes back. And this is giving us that during those 40 years, he wasn't just hanging out with sheep. He was actually being a very important ruler in the land of Ethiopia. And he married the native.
Was Ethiopia the country close to Midian?
No, not exactly. I mean,
They're both on the Red Sea.
so there is and isn't closeness, right? So geographically, it's not an easy walk. However, among civilizations, it's a very easy boat trip right across the Red Sea. And as far as their closeness goes in Habakkuk, the prophet, he actually uses Midian and Ethiopia, Cush, as being two parts of like the same coin for doing one of his parallelisms. So
this was more than likely the same wife.
it is perfectly possible that there was only one wife and that Zipporah was actually from Cush, but also from Midian, or maybe she was born from Jethro, but, you know, living in Cush. There are many different ways that we can work out the family tree.
Doesn't the Torah specifically say Moses went with his two wives somewhere?
Nope.
Nope.
He had two sons, that we know for sure, but it never explicitly says wives when it comes to Moses. Which is why this particular commentary is not universally accepted, because he's saying this is wife number 2. And he's going to argue that this is absolutely not Zipporah for the following reasons. For if, at the bottom paragraph, second line, last 3 words.
Or had he married a Cushite?
For if the Torah were referring,
Oh, yeah. Or if the Torah were referring to Zipporah, why would it state that Moses had married a Cushite woman, since we already know that Zipporah is a Midianite?
right? We know she's from Midian, so why use the word Cush? That's just confusing. The Torah wouldn't do that to be confusing.
Moreover, she was not a Cushite.
That doesn't say Zipporah wasn't a Cushite.
Well, Cush is the son of Ham, and Midian is the son of Keturah, and of the children of Abraham, Rashbam.
Right, so you may not remember, and that's why Rashbam is nice for reminding us, that Abraham, after Sarah dies, marries a woman called Keturah. And from her, he has 4 children. And among those children is Midian. So we have the family tree for Midian, and it doesn't go through Ethiopia. So we wouldn't, according to Rashbam, be right to say that Zipporah was Midianite and Ethiopian. She can only be one or the other by the tribal affiliations of the ancient world. Nowadays, yes, because we can use Cush to mean more than a tribal affiliation. We can use it to mean a genetic affiliation or anything else. In the ancient world, no. and the Bible was written in the ancient world. So making Zipporah and Zipporah and the Cushite wife the same wife, says Rashbam, doesn't make any sense, and we wouldn't want to think the Torah was trying to confuse us. Now, that does also add in all sorts of other problems of, well, why do we never hear about this woman? Why do we never hear about the kids that he may have had with her? Why did we not hear about him meeting her in the Torah? And so it's not exactly a beautiful, smooth, clean up of the whole story and making the narrative easy, but it is a valid position within the tradition. Did you have a question on that, or?
No, so he ruled in the land of Cush.
According to the apocryphal book, right? So that's not in the Torah. That's according to a book that didn't make the cut. It's not official canon. It's not officially, the absolutely everybody agrees this is what really happened, but it is an opinion within some of the old books about Moses.
Because of his upbringing and his knowledge.
He was raised as a leader. Ethiopia was a very important country, so it was the kind of place where he might have gone. It was also a place that could have protected him, whereas Midian was not really going to stand up to Egypt if Egypt decided to come hunting for him. So there are some good logical reasons why he might have gone to Ethiopia as well. But we don't have any 100% proof. Okay, so what does all of this tell us about what we started with and then quickly went away with, because it seems like our story is not about this at all? What does this have to do with racism? Apparently, this story itself is not about race at all. She might be Cush, she might not be Cush in the genetic sense, but either way, that doesn't seem to be an issue. The big issue seems to be, according to our tradition, of what are the rights that she has to her husband and how he treats her, and that doesn't seem to be dependent on her race. Or what is the status vis-a-vis Moses and his brother and sister, and that also doesn't seem to be dependent upon the race. But outside of that context, as long as we're talking about race, and as long as Roseanne brought it up yesterday, it seemed appropriate to ask about what does Judaism actually say about race. That is to say, the strict definition of race, meaning the particular color of a person's skin and their genetics from which they are from. Make sense? Okay, so let's take a look on the backside of some of the texts. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive bibliography. A few of the texts.
It is fitting to receive every person, lowly and grand, freed and slave, every member of humanity with joy and happiness. This goes beyond what Shammai says. Receive all people with a kindly countenance.
Right. So Shammai said smile. Rambam says you got to go more than a smile. Right? You got to go a little bit further than a smile. You have to receive everybody that is human with gladness and with joy, and be good to all of them. And you'll notice that he is very clear in his definition that includes everybody in the world. Right? He's not saying you got to be good to grand or low, high, freed or slave, every member of humanity except them. Right? He doesn't say any exceptions. It is you greet every individual. Yes, if someone comes at you with a sword, you don't smile and put your hand out. But we're talking about how you greet people, not as in the middle of battle or bandits or whatever. Good question.
Yes, I think we've talked about this before with Genesis. If all people are made in the image of the Almighty.
Absolutely.
This is
everybody, right? And
fundamental where we start.
Which gets reinforced with the story of Noah, where again, all of humanity comes from the righteous guy Noah. And even though the three sons end up being in different regions of the world, they are still three brothers, and therefore of equal standing. And even though one brother wasn't so nice, that didn't remove his humanity or the treatment that our tradition says we give to everybody in the world. All right, so that's the best blanket statement. But let's see if we can get into some more statements about how we treat people, because maybe we don't differentiate on race. Maybe we differentiate on whether they're Jewish or not.
Our sages commanded us to visit non-Jewish sick and to bury non-Jewish dead along with the Jewish dead, and support the non-Jewish poor along with the Jewish poor, for the sake of peace, as it says, God is good to all, and God's mercies extend over all God's work.
Which, by the way, is in what we call the Ashrei, Psalm 145, and which we recite 3 times a day to remind ourselves that God's good and God's mercy is to everything in God's creation. Keep going.
And the Torah ways are pleasant, and all its paths are peace.
Which you might also find familiar because that's one of the final lines we sing as we are putting the Torah back in the Ark at the end of the Torah service. So we should remind ourselves that whatever we've read in the Torah, we better be walking away with a message that is a message of peace and a message of pleasantness. Because if we come away with a message of anger or hate or bitterness, then we weren't reading the book right. And so this is a good reminder that we put into every Torah service. So again, Jewish or non-Jewish, we visit you when you're sick, we bury you when you're dead, right? If you're poor, we take care of you even if you're not Jewish. And because that's Mipnei Darchei Shalom. This is the way of peace, and that is the way of Torah. Okay, to drive it home even more in one of the very beautiful midrashim from Yalkut Shimoni, we continue in that next paragraph.
God gathered the dust of the first human from the 4 corners of the world, red, black, white, and green. Red is the blood, black is the innards, and green for the body. Why from the 4 corners of the earth? So that if one comes from the east to the west and arrives,
They're just one of them, it's a typo.
At the end of his life, as he nears departing from the world, it will not be said to him, this land is not the dust of your body, it's of mine. Go back to where you were created. Rather, every place that a person walks, from there he was created, and from there he will return.
Right, so taking that imagery of Adam being formed from the dust of the earth, the dirt of the earth, the Midrash says not only was he created from the dirt of the earth, like in a particular location, God used dirt from every corner of the earth and every color of dirt that you might ever expect to find. And that dirt is mixed into all of us, and different parts of that dirt became different organs and different limbs and all of that. And that means if you come from another country and you end up in this country, the locals can't say, this is our dirt. Your dirt can't die here, right? Because you have to go back to where you were created, where your dirt's from. Because that's not the way it is. The dirt of all the world is in all of us. And there's no reason why you would say this person of this nationality or this race belongs standing on this dirt more than that person of that nationality or race standing on that dirt. Because we were all made from all of the dirt of all of the world. Which is a good reminder as well that we're all dirt, which is why we shouldn't be putting on airs in the first place. But this idea of us being comprised of all of the pieces of the world, and so none of us is able to have this chauvinist tendency to say, this is my dirt, go die somewhere else, is I just found a very powerful metaphor, and one that I wish people took to heart more often. Onward, as we get some more statements straight up from the Tanakh, not commentary, but these are actually from the Bible.
To me, or Israelites, you are just like the Ethiopians, declares the Lord. True, I brought Israel up from the land of Egypt, but also the Philistines from Caphro and the Armenians from Kir.
Right, so what Amos is saying here is, I don't love Israel more than I love Ethiopians, right? Yes, I gave you Torah, and I have a particular role for you and this land of Israel for you, but that doesn't mean that they get nothing. Does someone have a little trash can? I think we have a leak. Is there a trash can over there in the back?
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, because we got one right there off the air conditioning fills up sometimes. Yep, it's definitely right there. That's okay. Perfect. Thank you. You got up at just the right time. So it's not to say that God doesn't have a different relationship, just like a parent would have a different relationship with each of their children. But Ethiopia, Israel, God loves them both. And so too for the people, the Philistines, and so too the people of the Arameans. God has a relationship with all of them, and God is involved in the history of all of these nations. And we may focus, especially in the Tanakh, on our own history and our own role, because we should look to your own affairs first to make sure you're in order. But that doesn't mean that it's exclusive and that we somehow monopolize God. And I'm going to need another reader to carry on.
Can the Cushite change his skin, or the leopard his spots? Just as much can you do good, who are practiced in doing evil.
So from Jeremiah, another reference to Cushite as being connected to the concept of skin color is saying, yes, people from Cush, they have a particular color of skin, and I wouldn't expect them to change it any more than I would expect a leopard to change its spots. But the funny thing that's being used here is this is being used as an insult to the Israelites. Because he's basically saying, the prophet Jeremiah, is they're not going to change. There's nothing wrong with them. And you're not going to change, but there is something wrong with you. Right? You have made your bad behavior like your nature. And that's not the way behavior is supposed to be. Behavior is always supposed to be changeable. Right? Sure, skin color, spots on a leopard, that is something that is not under your control and nothing that is important. Behavior that is under your control, that is important, and you're acting like you can't change what you're doing. And of course, Jeremiah was absolutely right, and we didn't change what we were doing, and the Babylonians brought the hammer down. Okay. In case you think this is only in the past, there's a telegram from Abraham Joshua Heschel, one of the great rabbis of the middle of the 20th century, who often worked on civil rights issues. And he was invited to participate in a council of religious leaders with John F. Kennedy. And he sent a telegram in advance of the meeting in order to make sure that it was going to go in the right direction.
I look forward to the privilege of being present at the meeting tomorrow. Likelihood exists that Negro problem will be like the weather.
Which, of course, in Florida, the weather.
Everybody talks about it, but nobody does anything about it. Please demand of religious leaders personal involvement, not just solemn declaration. We forfeit the right to worship God as long as we continue to humiliate Negroes. Church, synagogue have failed. They must repent. Ask of religious leaders to call for national repentance and personal sacrifice. Let religious leaders donate 1 month's salary for fund for Negro housing and education. I propose that you, Mr. President, declare a state of moral emergency. A Marshall Plan for aid to Negroes is becoming a necessity. The hour calls for moral grandeur and spiritual audacity.
One of his most famous phrases, the moral grandeur and spiritual audacity. And for those of you who maybe don't quite remember your post-World War II history, the Marshall Plan was the billions of dollars the United States invested in Europe in order to rebuild it after World War II as a bulwark against communism. And Abraham Joshua Heschel was saying, this is the level of investment and the level of intention that we need to give to what we would now call the African American communities of our country. That we can't just make speeches and we can't just say, oh, well, we have to actually put our money where our mouth is and try to fix the problems that are continuing to plague, because those are problems that were created. Those are not problems that are inherent within any one community. And we should be ashamed. I'm talking about us in present, that some, 55 years after this was written, it is just as applicable today as it was then. We have made strides, we have made great advances, but we're not done.
I have a quick question about this text. Do you come to any conclusion one way or the other? Is this reference to Cushite woman to Sephora, or to a second wife, or the third option, does it really matter?
The third option is it doesn't really matter. But of the actual question, if I were going to be casting the film of how would I do this, I think the lack of any other evidence of Moses having a second wife in the Torah itself, or any children being mentioned as being born to him from a second wife, makes me hesitant to think that he had two wives.
And that this is really slander.
I don't think this is slander on a racial level. I think this is what's that? This is jealous. I think this is actually. I think the Midrash got it right. If I were going to cast this whole scene, which is, I would have Zipporah lamenting what had happened. I would have Miriam commiserating with her and being furious that her brother was treating her sister-in-law like this, and then having God point out to Miriam and Aaron that no, Moses is a different person, right? He does have a different standard.
And finally, would this be considered tale-bearing or gossip? It's not slander.
No, well, it's not mutzi shem ra, right? It's not slander in the sense of lying or denigrating a person's character, but it is definitely speaking about truth in an unflattering way, which is lashon hara, exactly. And that's why she gets the punishment of tzara'at, which, as we talked about when we did Tazria, Mitzorah, and those sections of the Leviticus, is the usual punishment for those that are engaged in lashon hara and gossip. Now, when it came to casting the role of Zipporah, I think you could cast her as a person of Middle Eastern descent. I think you could cast her as somebody who looked African American, and both would fit the role just fine.
I thought Rashbam's argument in the Bible, a Midianite's a Midianite, a Cushite's a Cushite.
Well, which is nice.
Let's not try to
defend
one to the other.
Which is nice, and I think Rashbam makes a very good logical argument. But the Torah does sometimes use one word to mean something in one place and a different thing in another place. Sometimes it means geography, sometimes it means ancestry.
Well,
so
in the same section we have Ruel, the other name for Yitro.
Exactly.
Hobab, the other name for Midian.
So it's possible, and I think we can't come to a firm conclusion on the genetic makeup of Zipporah or the possible second wife, but I think that it is certainly on the table that she was of genetic stock from Ethiopia as a native. And there's nothing, it doesn't seem that the Torah cares about that in particular. It wants to know more about the relationship between the husband and wife rather than the DNA test of husband and wife. Is there?
Moses was 24/7 called
right.
to God, and of course he didn't have time. Why would he take a second wife?
Well, which would also, which would also be a problem. Obviously, if you have the idea, right, or unless he had married her prior to coming back for the Exodus. And so she was already with him for 40 years, as the Chronicles of Moses make as a story. So in that case, then they were together for 40 years. But then I would like to have seen some evidence of children being born, or some explanation that that was in fact Zipporah. And then we have to figure out why she's also called Midianite. But some things we'll never 100% know. But what we can tell is that the Torah doesn't seem to make a distinction between one person's skin color and another.
So it might be the same person.
It could very well be. Exactly right. It wouldn't be the first time, like Jethro himself, where one character gets more than one description, as Jethro is not always called Yitro. So, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.